Hey there, John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com. Welcome back to another episode of the John Morris Show. So this one I wanted to just sort of recap or revisit the last video that I did. Obviously, those of you who watched it knew that I was a little frustrated, a little irritated because of a comment that I had gotten. I'll link to the video on the show notes page for this episode, johnmorrisshow.com/313, or if you're on YouTube, it'll be a button in the top right. You can check that out if you haven't seen it. But I just wanted to sort of go back through this because, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, wow, there were almost more comments on that video than there were views. It was pretty crazy. The response was pretty insane. And I just, to most of you out there, all of you out there, really just say thank you for responding and chiming in. I mean, I never really wanted that video to be something where it came across like I was sort of seeking validation or approval. I really was just sort of kind of in a funk from that comment. And in the past, I've sort of just internalized those things and never really talked about them. And I didn't want to do that this time. So part of it was just me talking about it, so that as a way of working through it. But also, you know, I wanted, there's sort of a rational side of wondering if more people felt that way. And if there's a significant amount of people that felt that way, then, you know, maybe there's something to look at there. Turns out that that's probably not the case. But again, it's one of those things I just sort of wanted to throw it out there and see what happens. So again, thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all the nice things that everybody said. And you know, I definitely plan on continuing to do this. I don't want anybody to think that I'm not. I just sort of had a moment of, I would say, weakness. And that's maybe the second thing that I want to get into is, you know, look, I've talked a lot about how you have to ignore things like that, how you have to sort of move on from things, or people are going to say all sorts of stuff and you can't let that get to you. And the majority of the time I have that resolve, but we all have moments of weakness. We all have times where things get to us even though they shouldn't. I don't know why that particular comment got to me the way that it did. It just happened to on that day. And so I just sort of put it out there. But I don't think you should feel bad if you have moments of weakness. The biggest thing is to not make too many rash decisions in those moments, because that can sometimes cause you to start going, as I've talked about, 100 different directions, 100 miles an hour, and get absolutely nowhere. So I'm certainly not, you know, going to do that. But, you know, it was just sort of one of those moments where something that normally wouldn't get to me did, and I wanted to sort of work through it and see if other people felt the way that person felt, and go from there. The third thing I would say from this is, and I'll sort of talk about this a little bit more maybe towards the end, but is, as I've said, you always have to look at these things and look at it and see if there's anything valid in it. And I happened to get an email from this commenter who sort of went into more detail about where they were coming from. And that extra detail was very helpful and actually had some valid things and some valid points, and made me think about some things and actually do some things to address those particular issues, because I think thinking about it rationally, they have valid points. I'll talk about that in a second. But you always have to look at these things. It's easy to either accept them wholesale and let them sort of ruin your life, or brush them off wholesale and miss things that could actually make you better. And so I you know, after things had settled down, I took some time to look at what they had to say, and I have changed a few things, and I'll talk about what that is here in just a second. The last thing is, then I wanted to address some of the comments that I got on this video. And I want to try to make sure I say this the right way. I don't want this to come off in a sort of negative way. But a lot of the comments were things like, hey, don't listen to that guy. You shouldn't listen to that guy. Or even maybe a little bit more aggressive, or like, you know, why are you listening to this idiot or whatever? And one of the things I want to point out to you guys that maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not, but one of the things that can happen from sort of this side of the camera, so to speak, is that oftentimes when you deal with people, I would say especially on YouTube, is that the people who have something negative to say, whether they're being mean or they're actually providing constructive criticism or whatever, however they're approaching it, oftentimes the people who have something to say along those lines, if there's 10 people who feel a way that's maybe a little more negative, oftentimes it'll be 10 out of 10 people that will say something. Whereas if you have people who, watch what you do or consume your content or whatever, and they like it, they enjoy it, they get value out of it, oftentimes those people won't necessarily always say something. And so you might get, say, 20% or 10% of those people who can, on a sort of day in and day out basis, make those sort of comments. And what can happen is, from this side, your view of your audience and the people that are listening to you or whatever that you're interacting with, it can get a little bit skewed, because those negative comments, I think people in general already sort of just tend to focus on those more. But then when you have, it can seem like there's more of those because those people always comment, whereas the people who get value don't necessarily do that. And so again, it can just sort of warp your sense of things. And so what I'm driving at is that, if you're one of those people who's like, hey, why are you listening to this guy? Like, why are you even let this affect you at all? The reality of it is that, you can only have so much willpower and so much resolve on a day in and day out basis to understand that you probably are getting more people negatively commenting than positively commenting because of that, the way that gets skewed, right? Like it's hard to do that on a day in and a day out basis. And so it can start to get to you after a while. And so from your side of things, if you really want to support someone and encourage someone, or they're giving you something that you want more of, which a lot of people sort of commented that was the case, you kind of have to have the discipline to make sure that you show up on a day in and day out basis to remind that person that you are getting value, so that they don't get that sort of warped, skewed view of what's happening with the people that they're interacting with. And I'm talking about this, sort of in the context of a podcast. I'm talking about this sort of in the context of my podcast, but really, I mean, forget me, just in general in life, whether it's your kids or your spouse, your coworkers, other people that you follow online or whatever, you have to sort of know that oftentimes those people are going to hear the negative stuff more loudly and more aggressively than they're going to hear the positive stuff. And if you want them to continue what they're doing, you have to have the discipline yourself to make sure that even though you may watch something or you may interact with someone and have a good experience, and you sort of just kind of have that natural feel to sort of move on, that you have to have that discipline to stop and say, no, I need to say something to make sure that person knows, because they might not know. Because it could be that one comment. There was one comment, I'm not going to talk about what it was, but there was one comment in particular that I got on that video that basically, gave me the F off to anybody who has something. It gave me the willpower, like re-energize that willpower to say F off to anybody that might have something negative to say for probably another 100 videos. So sometimes all it takes is one comment like that. So I guess what I'm getting at is, don't be afraid to do that. And if somebody's doing something that you like, it's easy to say, well, why are you listening to those people? Well, sometimes those are the only people saying anything. So you have to, from that side, and I try to do this for myself. I don't want this to come across as accusatory, but you have to show up and you have to have that discipline to do that, even when it doesn't naturally necessarily feel like. When we're angry and we want to yell at someone, it's a lot easier to type those words than it is when we're like, oh yeah, that was really good. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. That was sort of the last thing that I was thinking about with this whole video. Now, as I mentioned, there were some valid points that this comment made that when I got this longer email sort of made sense to me and has caused me to make a few changes. And the big thing that you need to know about is that I created a new website called johnsfreetoots.com. Now, for those of you who are already, customers of my premium courses, or are just sort of looking at this going, no, don't do it. Don't worry. It's not everything. I haven't given away every premium course that I have. It's not that sort of thing. I'm not going down, I'm not going to the dark side on that sort of thing. But I do think with the way that YouTube has changed and putting actual coding tutorials on YouTube and, the way that all works just sort of on the business side of things, and it's not necessarily as feasible of a thing to do anymore, except in certain sort of specific situations. What can happen is people listen to this for me specifically, people listen to this podcast on, a daily basis or whatever. And I sort of have felt like I have established my credibility when it comes to coding, because I do have a bunch of tutorials that are already on here. But the reality is a lot of those are getting a bit older. And so you sort of have to reestablish that. And so I want to make sure I'm doing a good job of that and not just telling people about my courses, but actually letting people sort of experience that for themselves. And so what I've done is I've created a new website called johnsfreetoots.com. I've taken lessons from some of my premium courses and put them over there. They're 100% free to access. You can go through them. There's no strings or this, that, and the other. And of course, from my perspective, the idea is it's twofold. One, I do genuinely enjoy helping people and watching people have success and succeed and get where they want. And I've always wanted to use the stuff that people paid for to fuel this sort of growing library of free stuff for people who just are not in the financial situation to be able to do that. And I lost sight of that for a while. I sort of wasn't paying attention with the changes that I was making to the channel. And so this is sort of a remedy for that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, obviously, if you go over there and take some of those courses and you join my teaching style and what you're learning and so forth, and you want to learn other stuff and keep going and all that sort of thing, then, hopefully you'll invest in either some of my premium courses or you become a Patreon supporter or whatever. So, but again, none of that's required. Everything over there is completely free. Again, that's johnsfreetoots.com. So that's sort of the change that I've made. That's sort of my thinking on the last video. I'll probably pretty much wrap it up, I guess, at this point and move on. But I did want to address it and just, again, say thank you for all the comments. It was crazy. My phone was just going nuts all night that night. So it was pretty cool. So again, thanks for that. And that's it. That'll do it for this episode. If you like to, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. Also make sure to ring the bell so we actually get notified. Past episodes and links to the audio only version of the podcast on Android, iTunes, TuneIn. You can find it at johnmorrisshow.com. And finally, if you'll rate and review the podcast over on iTunes, I'd appreciate that. I'll also give you Module 1 of my PHP 101 course for free. All the details on that are at johnmorrisshow.com. Just click on the Start Here link at the top. All right, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.